"I'd choose him over you any day," she admitted about her boss during our date night. So I packed her bags before breakfast. He never left his wife, she got passed over for every promotion, and I've never been more relieved she showed her true colors. Those words still echo in my mind sometimes, but not with the pain they once carried. Now they just remind me how clearly people can show you who they really are when they think you're not paying attention. I'm David, 31, and I teach AP Calculus and Algebra at Northside High School here in Atlanta. For 3 years, I thought I was building something solid with Claire, something that would last. She was 27, working as an administrative assistant at Morrison, Blake & Associates, one of those prestigious downtown law firms with floor-to-ceiling windows and marble lobbies that scream old money and new power. I was the guy who believed in her when she doubted herself, who helped her tackle those crushing student loan payments from her communications degree, who celebrated every small victory in her career like it was my own promotion. When she'd come home frustrated about feeling overlooked or undervalued at the firm, I'd listen for hours, offering practical advice about professional development and reminding her that her worth wasn't determined by some corporate hierarchy. I even helped her prepare for the paralegal certification program she'd been considering, spending weekends making flashcards and running through practice questions. That's just who I am. When I care about someone, I invest in their success because I believe partnerships mean lifting each other up. But somewhere around month 30 of our relationship, the dynamic shifted in ways I was too trusting to recognize initially. Claire started working more closely with Jonathan Hartwell, one of the senior partners at Morrison Blake, and suddenly our dinner conversations took on a different tone entirely. Jonathan was everything you'd picture when you think of a high-powered attorney, silver-haired, commanding presence, the kind of guy who wore $1,000 suits like they were casual wear and had an office on the 40th floor with a view of the entire city skyline. Jonathan absolutely demolished the opposing counsel today, Claire would say during our weekly date nights at Romano's, her eyes lighting up with an enthusiasm I rarely saw when she talked about anything else. You should have seen how he controlled that deposition. Everyone in the room was hanging on his every word. At first, I chalked it up to professional admiration, the kind of respect you develop for a mentor who's good at their job. Lord knows I'd felt similar appreciation for the department head who'd taken me under his wing during my first year teaching, showing me how to connect with students who thought math was their enemy. But Claire's fascination with Jonathan felt different somehow, more personal, more intense. She'd quote his legal strategies like scripture, analyze his courtroom victories with the dedication of a sports commentator, and somehow always manage to steer our conversations back to his latest cases or his leadership style during firm meetings. Jonathan says the key to negotiation is never showing your hand too early, she'd explain while cutting her salmon, as if she were sharing profound wisdom instead of workplace small talk. He told me that weak people telegraph their desperation, but strong people make others come to them. I'd nod and smile, trying to be supportive, but there was something about the way she said his name, this reverent, almost breathless quality that made me feel like I was watching her discuss someone she was falling in love with rather than someone she worked for. The professional admiration soon morphed into something that felt more like worship, and with it came comparisons that cut deeper each time. Jonathan just bought a new Porsche, Claire mentioned casually while I was grading papers at our kitchen table, her tone suggesting this was somehow relevant to our lives. Must be nice to have that kind of disposable income. Some people know how to think big, you know? The implication hung in the air like smoke, that my teacher's salary of $62,000 was somehow evidence of limited vision rather than a conscious choice to work in education. She'd started making these little digs about my small-town mentality whenever I suggested we save money or plan our finances carefully, contrasting my practical approach with Jonathan's aggressive business tactics and high-stakes negotiations. According to Claire, Jonathan didn't waste time on cautious decisions. He saw opportunities and seized them, which apparently made him the kind of man who commanded respect in the real world. "You're so content with staying exactly where you are," she said one evening after I declined her suggestion to apply for an administrative position at the school district that would mean leaving the classroom. "Jonathan says that comfort is the enemy of greatness. He's always pushing boundaries, always looking for the next challenge." What she never seemed to grasp was that I'd found my calling working with kids who needed someone to believe they could master concepts that intimidated them, but increasingly I felt like I had to justify my career choice to the woman who was supposed to be my partner. Our third anniversary dinner at Canoe should have been a celebration of everything we'd built together, but instead it became a showcase of just how far Claire's priorities had drifted from our relationship. She'd chosen the restaurant herself, expensive, romantic, the kind of place with waterfront views and a wine list that required serious financial commitment, and I'd gladly made reservations because I wanted to mark the milestone properly. But halfway through our appetizers, her phone started buzzing with what she described as urgent work messages that required immediate responses. "I'm so sorry, babe," she apologized for the third time in 20 minutes, fingers flying across her screen. "Jonathan's dealing with this massive merger and he needs me to handle some coordination with the other partners." I watched her face glow in the phone's light, completely absorbed in whatever crisis was allegedly unfolding at Morrison Blake, while our server refilled wine glasses and waited patiently to take our entree orders. The conversation that evening, when we managed to have one between text exchanges, kept circling back to Jonathan's recent separation from his wife, something Claire discussed with the breathless fascination of someone following a favorite television drama. "He's finally free to focus on what really matters," she explained, as if a man's divorce was somehow a career enhancement rather than a personal tragedy. His wife never understood his ambition, never supported his vision for the firm. Some women just can't handle being with a truly successful man. The irony of her words wasn't lost on me, sitting there in a restaurant I could barely afford, listening to my girlfriend of 3 years analyze another man's marriage while ignoring our own anniversary celebration to answer his text messages. The breaking point came 3 weeks later during what was supposed to be a celebration dinner at the Capitol Grill. Claire had been hinting for days that she might finally get the promotion to junior paralegal that she'd been working toward, and I'd suggested we mark the occasion properly regardless of the outcome because I believed in supporting her ambitions even when they seemed to be pulling her away from us. She dressed up in that black cocktail dress I'd bought her for her birthday, the one that made her feel confident and powerful, and for a brief moment as we walked into the restaurant, I felt hopeful that we might recapture some of the connection we'd lost. But the wine started flowing early, first a glass of champagne to toast her potential promotion, then a bottle of expensive Bordeaux that she insisted we needed because this is how successful people celebrate. I should have recognized the warning signs when she started getting that loose, reckless look in her eyes that alcohol sometimes brought out, but I was still trying to be the supportive boyfriend who wanted to share in her happiness. The conversation meandered through work gossip and office politics until she started talking about Jonathan again, but this time with a rawness that felt different, more personal. "You know what I love about Jonathan?" she said, swirling her wine with the kind of dramatic gesture that comes with 3 glasses too many. "He doesn't apologize for wanting more. He doesn't settle for safe, boring choices like some people do." The dig was clearly aimed at me, but I let it slide because I could see she was building up to something bigger, something she'd been holding back. "Jonathan sees potential in me that nobody else does," she continued, her voice getting louder and more animated. "He told me yesterday that I have the kind of sharp mind that could go places in this business, that I shouldn't waste my talents being content with mediocrity." Then she looked directly at me with eyes that were slightly unfocused but brutally honest, and delivered the words that ended our 3-year relationship. "If Jonathan wanted me, I'd choose him over you any day. He's everything you'll never be: ambitious, powerful, the kind of man who makes things happen instead of just talking about them." The restaurant noise seemed to fade away as those words hung between us. No anger, no dramatic reaction, just a calm clarity that settled over me like a blanket. I signaled for the check without saying a word, paid the bill while she continued rambling about Jonathan's latest legal victory, and drove us home in complete silence while she dozed against the passenger window. While Claire slept off the wine in what used to be our bed, I spent the night methodically dismantling the life we'd built together. I packed her clothes into the suitcases she'd brought when she moved in, carefully folding everything just like she preferred. I gathered her books, her jewelry, her collection of legal drama DVDs, and that ridiculous motivational poster about crushing your goals that she'd hung in our bedroom. I canceled our shared Netflix account, removed her name from our lease renewal application, and transferred her half of the security deposit into her checking account because I'm not the kind of person who steals, even when I've been betrayed. I even called her sister Jen at 6 in the morning to explain the situation and arrange for Claire to stay there temporarily, because despite everything, I wasn't going to leave her homeless. When Claire finally woke up around 10, hungover and confused, she found her packed bags lined up neatly by the front door and me sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a calm expression. "What's all this?" she asked, squinting in the morning light and probably hoping this was some kind of misunderstanding. "You made your priorities very clear last night," I said simply. "I'm just helping you follow through on them." The panic hit her face like a physical blow as the previous evening came flooding back. "David, no, I was drunk. I was just being dramatic because I was nervous about the promotion. I didn't mean any of that." But I'd already changed the locks that morning, called a 24-hour locksmith and paid extra for the early service, and I handed her the spare key along with a printed list of her belongings so she could verify nothing was missing. "You said if Jonathan wanted you, you'd choose him over me any day," I reminded her quietly. "You called him everything I'll never be." Those words came from somewhere real, Claire. Alcohol doesn't create feelings, it just reveals them. She tried tears, then anger, then desperate bargaining, promising to quit her job and find work somewhere else if I'd just give her another chance. But I'd heard enough honesty for one relationship, and I wasn't interested in forcing someone to want me who'd already told me exactly how little I meant to her compared to her boss. 2 months after Claire moved out, I was finally settling into the rhythm of living alone again, grading papers in peaceful silence, cooking meals I actually wanted to eat, watching documentaries instead of legal dramas, when my friend Marcus called with news that would have been devastating if I'd still been emotionally invested in Claire's choices. Marcus worked in accounting at a firm that shared office space with Morrison Blake, which meant he had front-row seats to the legal community gossip that traveled faster than court filings in downtown Atlanta. "Dude, you're not going to believe what happened to your ex," he said during our usual Thursday night basketball game. "Remember that boss she was obsessed with? Jonathan something?" I did remember, unfortunately. "Yeah, Jonathan Hartwell. What about him?" Marcus paused his dribbling and looked at me with that expression people get when they're about to deliver news that's simultaneously terrible and satisfying. "Well, turns out the guy was never actually getting divorced. Apparently, he and his wife were just going through a rough patch, and they've been in counseling trying to work things out. The whole separation thing was just them taking some space, not him being finally free, like Claire thought." The irony was almost too perfect. Claire had built her entire fantasy around Jonathan being available, reading meaning into his professional kindness that simply wasn't there. But Marcus wasn't finished with the story. "It gets worse," he continued. "Claire apparently made some kind of move on him during one of those late-night strategy sessions she was always bragging about. Word is she completely misread the situation and basically threw herself at him when they were alone in his office working on the Henderson merger. I could picture it perfectly, Claire, emboldened by months of imagined chemistry and convinced that Jonathan had been sending her signals, finally deciding to act on her feelings. The desperation and humiliation she must have felt when he rejected her was almost enough to make me feel sorry for her. Almost. Jonathan was apparently horrified, Marcus explained. Not just because she's his employee, but because he realized she'd been misinterpreting his professional mentorship as something romantic. He immediately reported the incident to HR to protect himself legally, and the law firm had to take action to avoid any potential harassment claims. The consequences had been swift and brutal. Morrison Blake, valuing their senior partner's reputation over an administrative assistant's feelings, had quietly transferred Claire to the estate planning department, a significantly less prestigious division where she'd be handling routine paperwork instead of high-stakes litigation support. The promotion she'd been counting on, the junior paralegal position that was supposed to launch her legal career, had gone to Jennifer Walsh, a colleague who understood the difference between professional respect and personal attraction. "The whole office is talking about it," Marcus added with the kind of grim satisfaction that comes from watching someone's arrogance backfire spectacularly. "Apparently, Claire's been trying to act like nothing happened, but everyone knows." She went from being Jonathan's trusted assistant to being the cautionary tale about maintaining professional boundaries. I felt a strange mix of vindication and genuine sadness hearing about Claire's downfall. Part of me, the part that had spent 3 years being made to feel inadequate compared to Jonathan's success, couldn't help but appreciate the cosmic justice of her fantasy crashing into reality. But another part of me, the part that had genuinely cared about her happiness and growth, felt sorry that she'd destroyed her own career chasing something that was never real in the first place. 6 months passed before Claire reached out, and when she finally did, the desperation was unmistakable. It started with text messages that arrived sporadically over the course of a week, tentative at first, then increasingly urgent as I continued not responding. "David, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I really need to talk to you." Then emails to my school account that somehow made it past the spam filter. "Please just give me 5 minutes to explain what happened. I made terrible mistakes and I need you to know how sorry I am." Finally, on a Thursday afternoon while I was setting up lab equipment for my AP students, the main office called to tell me someone was in the parking lot asking to speak with me. I knew it was Claire before the secretary even finished explaining, and part of me wanted to send word that I was busy and couldn't be interrupted. But curiosity won out. I needed to see for myself what 6 months of consequences had done to the woman who'd once told me I wasn't ambitious enough to deserve her. I found her leaning against a Honda Civic that looked like it had seen better years, a far cry from the leased BMW she'd been driving when we were together. The designer clothes had been replaced with off-the-rack business attire that hung slightly loose on her frame, suggesting she'd lost weight. But it was her expression that told the real story. The confident, entitled energy that used to radiate from her had been replaced by something that looked like permanent defeat. "Thank you for coming out," she said as I approached, her voice smaller than I remembered. "I wasn't sure you would." "What do you need, Claire?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral but not unkind. She took a shaky breath and launched into what sounded like a prepared speech about how wrong she'd been, how she'd learned her lesson, how she finally understood what she'd lost when she chose fantasy over reality. "Jonathan never saw me as anything more than an employee," she admitted, the words coming out rushed and painful. "All those times I thought he was giving me special attention, treating me differently, I was just making it up in my head because I wanted something more exciting than what we had." I listened without interrupting as she explained how the harassment incident had destroyed not just her job prospects but her reputation throughout the Atlanta legal community. Word had spread beyond Morrison Blake, making it nearly impossible for her to find another position at a respectable firm. She was currently working as a receptionist at a small personal injury practice, making less money than she'd earned 3 years ago and watching former colleagues advance in careers she'd torpedoed for herself. "I realize now that you were everything I actually needed," she continued, tears starting to flow down her cheeks. "You supported my dreams, believed in me when I didn't believe in myself, made me feel secure and valued. I threw away something real for a fantasy that was never even there." The apology was sincere, I could tell, but it was also too late. "I'm sorry that happened to you," I said honestly. "I'm sorry you're struggling, and I'm sorry you had to learn those lessons the hard way." Her face lit up with hope, misreading my sympathy for reconciliation. "Does that mean you might consider giving us another chance? I know I hurt you terribly, but I've changed. I understand now what loyalty means, what commitment actually looks like." I looked at her standing there in the parking lot of my school, asking me to rebuild something she'd deliberately destroyed, and felt nothing but relief that I'd trusted my instincts 6 months ago. "Claire, I genuinely hope you find happiness and rebuild your career," I said carefully. "But when you told me you'd choose Jonathan over me any day, when you called him everything I'd never be, you weren't lying or being dramatic. You were telling me exactly how you saw me compared to what you thought you deserved." She opened her mouth to protest, but I continued. "I can't go back to being with someone who views relationships as competitions, who measures love by salary figures and status symbols. You didn't just hurt my feelings that night, you showed me that we want fundamentally different things from life." The conversation ended quietly, without drama or angry words. She asked if we could at least stay in touch, maybe grab coffee sometime, but I declined as gently as possible. Some doors, once closed, are meant to stay that way. As I watched her drive away in that tired Honda, I felt grateful rather than vindicated. Claire had done me the favor of showing her true priorities before I'd made any permanent commitments, before I'd wasted more years trying to be enough for someone who would always be looking over my shoulder for something better. Now I was free to find someone who valued loyalty over status, someone who understood that real partnership means building each other up instead of constantly measuring against impossible standards.